Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our Saturday masterclass on gender segregation. I hope you are all having a fantastic day. Hosted by yours truly, ISB Campus and ISB. I want to start off by saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most kind, and to send mercy and blessings on the Prophet, peace be upon him, inshallah. Uncle Ahtsham is married with 3 children, mashallah, and is currently the lead advisor for Her Majesty's Prison Service. He has been involved with ISB for a long time. He's been a friend of campus. He's been the chair of ISB. He's been the project lead for the Living Islam Festival. He's been a long-standing Shura member, and he has led a lot of masterclasses before on radicalization, on the meat industry, and very well educated, mashallah, a master's in theology and religious studies. And he has spent 19 years learning fiqh, alhamdulillah. So over to Uncle Ahtsham.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is indeed due to Allah. May his peace and blessings be upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, our master, our teacher, on how to follow the rules and guidelines that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid down in the Quran. And indeed, this whole session today will be about following the Quran and the Sunnah. I greet you all, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, my dear brothers and sisters. And thank you very much for tuning into this, and thank you for ISB for giving me this platform to discuss an issue which some see as a peripheral issue, but for many others it's quite an important one. Let me just give you a bit of background about how I came to do this particular research on this issue. Going back to almost about 15 years ago, I was organizing a training event, and I had quite a few learned, almost about 120 people coming to the event, and quite a few scholars, a majority were scholars actually. And I received an email from one of the imams to say that he hoped that I had made arrangements for the women who were coming. And we had about 15 or so women who were coming to the training event, which was over 4 days. And we had about 105 men coming. So he said, I hope you've made arrangements for the women who are coming. So I said, well, what do you mean arrangements? What kind of arrangements? He said, you know, separate room, video facilities, etc. So I said, well, they were going to be in the same room. And he said, well, Brother Ahtsham, that's haram. And, you know, you control the event, you control the training, and you cannot surely be thinking of committing a haram. So I said, Master, you're the only one who's so far come forward with this. And so at the moment, I have one big lecture room, and in that will be men and women, albeit a small number of women, but the men and women will be there, and we'll conduct the training program accordingly. And you're the only one who's come forward with this. To my surprise, a couple of days later, I received a petition from 12 imams who were coming to say that what I was doing was, what I was proposing was forbidden in Islam. It's a sin. And could I please make sure, and it was a request from them, a humble request, could I please make sure that facilities were there for the Muslim women who were coming? So I asked, why is it a sin? What is the evidence that this is a sin? And they sent me about 4 or 5 different fatwas from different muftis across the world. And I started looking at this issue. There was a bit of time before the program. And that's what began this research. And I had the great benefit of my teacher, Sheikh Abdullah al-Judai, who is a muhaddith, an expert on hadith and the analysis of hadith, the weighting, the authenticity, etc. And I was able to cross-check the hadiths used and then come forward and analyze the arguments. When it came to the event, and before the event, the training event, I went and spoke to quite a few of the other imams, and the vast majority felt it was fine for the sisters to be there with the brothers. And I asked the women, they felt comfortable with that arrangement. I was now confident that the position that I had taken on it was an acceptable position in Islam, as of course was theirs. Theirs was a legitimate view also. And so when the day arrived of the training program, I asked the sisters if they could wait outside the main hall, and they asked why, and I said, just please trust me and bear with me. I waited until all the men had arrived, and then I stood up on the podium and I said, before I begin the official greeting and opening of this training program, I have asked the sisters to wait outside, and I want to say to you, I received 12 of you, I received a petition from 12 of you to say that men and women should not be in the same room together. You believed it was haram. I also requested and asked other imams the same question, and they felt it was all right. So I have taken the liberty and made arrangement for a room upstairs and obtained a video link. There are 12 chairs upstairs. So could those imams who believe it is a sin, could you please move upstairs to this room before I ask the women to come in? Because it is important that we do not ask people to commit sin, that we respect all views, whatever they are, we respect that they are legitimate views. Sadly, and I say sadly because I would have had greater respect had those imams left. They did not leave. And I found that quite perturbing, and I did mention it to them afterwards that I was quite surprised that they didn't. And then we proceeded, and the women came in, and then we began the program and so on. But this is the research that I did then. My apologies for you. I've been very busy over the last 4 or 5 weeks, so I've not had much chance to tweak this. I wanted to tweak this to the setting for now and upgrade it, and I've not had that much of a chance to do so. But let's muddle through, and I'm sure you'll understand what it is that I'm trying to do. So here we go. It's a PowerPoint, so let's go through that, and hopefully you should be able to see that. Right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So let's look at what it is that exactly that I'm going to be covering. So before we do that, let's identify and make sure we're clear and concise about the definitions we'll be using. Mixed gathering, intermingling, segregation, what is it all about? So for the purposes of this study, mixed gathering or intermingling or free mixing is men and women who are not mahram. Mahram means that you are not able to, they are not of a category where you can marry them. So men and women who are not mahram, so they're not close relatives, being together in one room or one space with no physical partition between them. So that is deemed, as far as this presentation is concerned, to be free mixing or intermingling. So therefore, what is segregation, or more specifically, gender segregation? Somebody rang me to say, are you talking about the COVID-19 segregation? And so I'm specifically talking about gender segregation. It is the opposite of the above, obviously. So it is men and women who are not mahram being separated by a barrier so that they are never in one room or space together. So that's what segregation is. What am I going to cover? I'm covering the issue, are mixed gatherings haram? And the definition of haram, of course, is something that if you do is a sin. That on the day of judgment, it is counted as a sin. That the angel on the left writes it down as a sin. And on the day of judgment, you'll be accounted for that sin. It causes the displeasure of Allah. And it'll be weighed against you on the day of judgment, and Allah will, when Allah judges. And what is the evidence, if it is haram, what is the evidence from Quran and Hadith for this? What I will not cover is the issue about hijab and khimar and niqab and jilbab. So I won't discuss hijab, and hijab literally means separation, segregation, but not in the context I mean here. Khimar, the head covering, niqab, the face covering, jilbab, the outer garment. That is a much more detailed topic for another time. Neither is this presentation here telling you what you should do. If something is halal to do, it does not mean it is obligatory nor recommended to do. It just means it's not a sin to do. If somebody said to me, is it halal in Islam for me to sniff the sewer, the gutter? Yeah, well, no problem if you want to do it. It's not a sin. Doesn't mean that every Saturday and Sunday you go sniffing the gutter. That's entirely up to you. So when something is allowed, mubah or halal, it does not mean it becomes a recommendation or an obligation. It means it's allowed to do. Now, I just want to, before we begin, I want to just allay a common myth. People think, and people rightfully think, that we are obliged to follow the Prophet ﷺ. Yes, it is true, but in his statements and the principles that he ﷺ established. The way the Prophet ﷺ did something or his companions did something is not binding on us, except for the statements and the principles he ﷺ established. If we say his mode of transport from his home to the end of town was camel or donkey, then it's not binding on us to go by camel or donkey, just because he ﷺ did it, unless he stated something. We know the Prophet ﷺ loved the gourd or the kaddu. So eating kaddu does not become the gourd, or it does not become something which is recommended for you to do. It's allowed for you to do. So not everything the Prophet ﷺ did or his companions did is binding. What is binding from the Prophet ﷺ is what he wanted to be binding on us, and his statement, his goal, established that. And the principle of the Quran, he then elucidated the principles of the Quran on it. Okay. And just on behalf of ISB, I was in ISB and I know its principle, which is very dear to me. ISB's principle, of course, every talk is the opinion of the person, the presenter. This is the opinion I follow. This is not the view of ISB, of course. And ISB has always maintained, and YM before it, that we do not demand, it does not demand of its members to follow any particular fiqh ruling. Every person is entitled to follow their own opinion. Now, only in exceptional circumstances a decision may need to be made, but generally speaking, it's an organization which is free from fiqh control. Okay, this is a very emotive issue. And very emotive. The last time I presented this was in 2011, and I got a flurry of negative coverage. People were highly disrespectful, is the only way I can mention, and people were very upset. Comes with the territory, I suppose. But it's very important we don't add to the Sharia what is not there by Quran and Sunnah. We may decide not to do something because of our wisdom or our context, but we don't use the word haram. Haram is a big word. It requires evidence from the Quran and Hadith. You do not throw those words lightly. Please don't misquote me, be honorable. Don't just hear what you want to hear. It's very easy to do, but try and listen to the whole thing, and by all means, please pose your questions at the end. Bismillah. Let's begin by just sending ground rules about usul al-fiqh. The principle, the fundamental principle of Sharia is that everything is allowed unless it is forbidden. What does that mean? It means that all actions are permitted unless there is an evidence against them. So the onus of proof is always on the person saying it's forbidden. So you don't fall into the trap that some people say, oh, you're doing that, aren't you? What's your proof that doing that is okay? No, throw it back. it's okay. The proof needs to be provided by those who say it's not okay. So the onus of proof is always on the one who says it's disliked or forbidden, not on the one who believes it's okay. Okay, so that's a very important principle here. Only Allah is the lawmaker. Only Allah decides the priorities, what is fard and what is sunnah, what is mubah, etc. And the Prophet ﷺ can make law by Allah's permission because he is Allah's Rasul, and because the Prophet ﷺ was in contact with him, his beloved messenger, and so on. That's how we get the sunnah. On any issue, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not said anything on a matter, and it cannot be found in the evidences, and normally we say that the 4 evidences, Quran, Sunnah, Qiyas, Ijma, but I mean, even if they're not found in the Quran and it's not found in the Sunnah, and even by Qiyas you can't get it, etc., then we say, as a general rule, the matter is acceptable. It's allowed. So the default position comes in again. And if anybody says it's a sin, we say, well, how can anyone say it's a sin or that it's a reward to do so and so when Allah himself has not implied it or stated it? Okay. Sorry, just a minute. On what basis was it decided that an action, doing something, has reward, or that another thing has a sin on the Day of Judgment, when Allah himself has neither said it nor implied? It's a very, very important point, and it leads to, the concept of Tawheed is there. It's the sovereignty of Allah as the lawmaker. By here, lawmaker, I don't mean parking on double yellow lines, etc. I mean Sharia law, divine law. Okay. Now, people often say that vain desires, because we are not allowed to follow our vain desires, our egos. People often say vain desires are wanting things to be liberal, but actually wanting things to be strict are also vain desires. And it's very important to realize that. In some faiths, punishing yourself, making things harder for yourself was supposed to be more closer to godliness. So you had in some faiths people who would punish themselves in order to get themselves closer to God. We don't have this idea. It is a myth to believe that the stricter something is, the more closer to godliness it is. Absolute myth. That is not true. And we have to be very careful about following our desires either way. Okay. Lastly, of course, this is fiqh, detailed Islamic law, allowed, not allowed, what to do, and so on. This is not an aqeedah issue. It is not a creedal or a belief issue. It's not about iman and kufr. So therefore, just like with all fiqhi issues, there are differences of opinion, and differences of opinion are absolutely okay. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the famous hadith, when a judge judges and strives and is correct, and he has 2 rewards. If he judges and strives and errs, then he has a single reward. And I don't know why those musical notes are there, because this session isn't about is music allowed or not. That's a separate session. But forgive me for that. But so here the hadith is saying if a scholar makes a decision and is wrong, errs, then that scholar will still get a reward. And if Allah gives a wrong opinion reward, how can we as human beings disregard it or disrespect it? We can say we don't agree with it, but we can't disrespect it. Okay, so have respect for different fiqh opinions. Right, let's establish ground rules or background. Let me just go through, because we are dealing with an emotive issue. We're dealing with an issue to do with a gender interaction between men and women. And many people have written about it. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Psychologists have written about it. People have asked the question, can men and women be friends? Can men interact with women platonically? There's a whole host of research on this by psychology. I'm not talking about religious, I'm not talking about Islamic, Christian, or whatever it is. But there is so much material out there, and it's a very interesting PhD topic for someone to look at gender differences and interactions. I'm looking at specifically from an Islamic perspective, what is authentic about gender interaction before we go into the idea of can men and women be together in one room. Right, from the evidences, it is absolutely clear, zina, adultery, fornication, etc., sex outside of Sharia is not permitted in Islam. It is a major sin. And the Quran is very clear. And those who invoke not any other God, any God alongside with Allah, nor kill such people as Allah has forbidden, except for just cause, nor commit illegal sexual intercourse. So the first one is shirk, the second one is murder, and the third one is zina. So Quran clearly states about the severity of the sin of adultery. Okay, so clear, that is absolutely clear. I still get asked by people, are you allowed to have, as Muslims, are you allowed to have sex before marriage, etc., etc., and we have to spell it out. Okay, that's number one. Number two, khulwa, being alone in a private setting between a man and a woman. Okay, so being alone, just one man, one woman in a private setting. And what is private? Where people, it's not a public setting. So the Prophet ﷺ said, beware of sitting with women alone. The companions asked, what about the relatives of the husband, i.e. the brother-in-law? The Prophet ﷺ replied, he is death. And then by death, he means beware still. Okay, so this is about being on your own with a member of the opposite gender. Of course, in certain situations, you can't avoid it, and certain situations are public, private. There's big debates among scholars. I was with a scholar in the mid-90s, Sheikh Saeed Darsh, and he was asked about taxi drivers picking up women and so on, and he was saying, well, a taxi, in his view, was a public place, especially in daylight hours, etc. And so many different debates about what is public and what is private. But everybody accepts that being alone with between men and women in a private setting is forbidden. Okay. Number three, flirtation and seduction. And of course, this is a famous hadith about the 7 who are granted shade on the Day of Judgment. And it's a hadith that you should memorize. Actually, it's a very, very famous hadith. But notice that the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th person, a man, and it could have, every time a man is mentioned, unless there is qarina context to say otherwise, you can reverse it. So a woman whom a handsome man of high rank seduces, but she says, I fear Allah. But here it's a man whom a beautiful woman of high rank seduces, but he says, I fear Allah, ittaqallah, and he moves away. Okay, or she moves away. So again, this is clearly stating that seduction, flirtation is not allowed in Islam. Number 4, the awrah to be covered. I asked the Prophet ﷺ, O Prophet, concerning the awrah, what is allowed for us, what is not? And the Prophet ﷺ replied, protect your awrah, except from the wife, etc. Okay, so again, not to uncover the awrah. And the debate, of course, what is awrah? That's not for this. The lustful look, the lustful speech, the lustful touch, etc. And this is a very famous hadith narrated Abdullah ibn Abbas, who I did not see anything so resembling minor sins as what Abu Huraira narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, who said, there are different versions of this hadith, and some mention the touching, etc. So I've taken the Bukhari. Allah has written for the son of Adam his inevitable share of zina, whether he is aware of it or not. Now notice here, in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is saying is every son of Adam, every human being will have a share of adultery. And what is this? The zina of the eye is the looking at something which is sinful to look at. And the zina of the tongue is to utter what is unlawful to utter, etc. And the other hadith mentioned about zina of the touch and so on. And the inner self wishes and longs for adultery, and the private parts turn that into reality or refrain from submitting into temptation. Okay, so lustful look, speech, etc. So these are the 5 areas that clearly demarked for our interaction. Now, let's look at this issue. Just a minute. I can't seem to move it on. Ah, here we are.
Number 16, mingling between the male and female students in the classes in the universities and schools. You mentioned this one, but it's a very dangerous one, is it not? Is it not a dangerous one? Astaghfirullah al-Azim. This is a matter where every single one of us have taken lightly, have taken too lightly. You want to educate your wives in a devilish way, and you leave the Islamic way. But, this is the excuse. It's always, but, I need her to be a doctor, a teacher, a this, a that, a shaitana. Because that's all she is. That's all she is. No matter how pious she is, she goes to university, and you, a man, allow her, you are a cuckold. That's all you are. There is no other word for her. For you, and there is no other word for her. For disobeying Allah Ta'ala. Think about it. Think about it. Be logic, be rational, have common sense, think about the situation. A lady is sitting here. She's your sister, she's your mother, she's your daughter, she's your granddaughter, she's your niece, she's your wife. And then next to her, whether in front, behind, there is a man, is a man, is a man, is a man, is a man. With an earring. Whatever he is, I don't know if it's a man, he's got an earring on. And he speaks like a man. Can you allow your sister or your wife or any other female responsibility to be in that class? Can you really think about it? You're a Muslim man. You care about your female responsibility. You care about her. Wallahi, if you're allowed to go there, you don't care about her. You're a liar. An L-I-A-R, a liar. Nothing else.
I think you can see how emotional this subject can become. That is one fatwa from thousands of fatwas that you can get on the internet, and you'll see so many scholars and so many people in groups giving you their view, which is that any free mixing, i.e. any men and women in one room, is completely haram. And what I did for this particular research is I collected as much as I could, I mean, from that young man as well, and from his talk and many others. I collected as much as I could evidences that they were using to come to this quite a firm decision, fatwa, that it is a sin for a man to be in the same setting as a woman. So what that young man went on to say was that no Muslim really could go to a mixed school, mixed university, mixed workplace, etc. And that everything should be in a single gender workplace if possible, and otherwise you can't. You cannot compromise your haram, as it were. So very emotional subject. I collated about 11 evidences, and most of the fatwa that are popularly out there, and you just have to PDF, and if you Google, and you'll see tons of them. Most of them covered maybe 5 or 6 evidences of why it's haram. Others did 5 or 6 more, 5 or 6, 7, and I collated all of them, and I came to about 11. And we're going to go through very quickly those evidences. Okay, so the first evidence that they mention is, of course, the Quran. And they mention this particular verse. O you wives of the Prophet, you are not like any other women. If you keep your duty to Allah, then be not soft of speech, lest he in whose heart is a disease aspire to you, but utter customary speech. And stay in your homes. Do not display your finery like it was displayed in the time of ignorance. Be regular in prayer and pay the zakat and obey Allah and His Messenger. Allah's wish is to remove uncleanliness from you, O people of the Prophet's household, and purify you with a thorough purification. Okay, so this is the ayah that's primary evidence that they use. And the bit that they use is this particular bit. وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ, and stay in your homes. Now, what they say is that this ayah, that particular bit is in an imperative. It is a command. Allah is saying, stay in your homes. And anything that comes as a command, generally speaking, the default position of commands is it becomes fard. And so here they're saying you are told to stay in your home. It is an obligation. And violation of this, therefore, becomes a sin. So that's their primary evidence. The second verse that they use is this one. O you who believe, enter not the dwellings of the Prophet. Sorry, just a minute. And when you ask of them, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, anything, ask of it from them from behind a curtain. And that's, of course, the definition of hijab as a separation. That is purer for your hearts and for their hearts. And it is not for you to cause annoyance to the Messenger of Allah. Know that you should ever marry his wives after him. Lo, that in Allah's sight would be an enormity. So this is the second evidence that they use from the Quran. Now, regarding the first one, it's a very important point here to make. You see, it's very interesting that Allah says, O you wives of the Prophet. So this ayah is addressing the wives of the Prophet as a special category of people. And then Allah says, you are not like other women. And so, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ, and stay in your homes, is an order for who? For the wives of the Prophet. It doesn't mention other women. It mentions the wives of the Prophet. And now we come to a very unusual, interesting phenomenon, because when you start looking at, for any verse, if you want to know what does it mean, how you look at commentaries, tafsirs. Of course, all tafsirs are opinions of the mufassir, of the commentator. The scholar who's writing the commentary, it is his or her opinion, what they write, their view about this particular ayah. Now, what is fascinating to find is that all the major tafsirs of this ayah say something that I did not expect when I was doing the research. They say, and this is Imam Qurtubi in his famous tafsir, this verse indicates the permissibility to ask and converse with the wives of the Messenger of Allah from behind a screen. All Muslim women will be bound by this. But the verse said, oh, wives of the Prophet. And if you look at Ibn Kathir, of course, very famous, meaning as I forbid you to enter their rooms, I forbid you to look, etc. If one wants to ask a woman, then the same has to be done from behind a screen. So what they've done is they've taken these verses and they've made them of general applicability. So when I had a debate with a mufti on this issue in about 2009, and I asked him, can Allah speak to a particular group of people? Can Allah speak to, for example, Bani Israel, the Jews, the Jewish community? And he said, yes, of course he can. I said, and how would you expect such a verse to begin? Ya Bani Israel, or children of Israel, or believers, or mushriks. So, Ya ayyuhal kafirun. So it's all of these, Allah's addressing specific people. So I asked the Mufti, I said, can I ask, can Allah speak just to the Prophet's wives? He said, yes. I said, and how would you expect a verse like that to begin? He didn't say anything. I said, surely that kind of verse would begin with, O wives of the Prophet. And Allah knows best, but maybe to make sure that no one could take this injunction and make it applicable to all women, came the second line. You are not like any other women. I could not find any evidence, and I asked quite a few scholars, and they said, so some said there isn't any. I could not find any evidence why this particular injunction is applicable to all women. Okay, so it's a very important point that. Now, if we take, for example, what some argued back, some said, be regular in prayer. Are you saying that only the Prophet's wives have to be regular in prayer? And pay the zakat. Are you daring to say only the wives of the Prophet pay zakat? And obey Allah and His Messenger? Only wives obey Allah and His Messenger? No, I'm not. I'm saying if this was the only verse that said be regular in prayer and pay the zakat and obey Allah, if this was the only verse to do this, then yes, I would say that. But this isn't the only verse that mentions about regularity in prayer, that mentions of giving zakat, aqimus salat wa atu zakat, and obeying Allah and His Messenger. There are tons of verses about this. But this is the only verse that has and stay in your homes. So what I'm saying is all the rest of it can be found in other verses, but the staying in your homes is only found in this particular verse. And therefore, the argument that the scholars I follow say that this command is for the Prophet's wives only. They were the only females obliged to cover their face, to speak to people from behind a screen, and to stay in their homes unless there was a need. Okay, now, Imam Ibn Battal says in his commentary of Bukhari, he said the separation between males and females is not an obligation on Muslim women as it was only a commandment on the wives of the Prophet. So that's the opinion that I particularly follow, because I cannot find any evidence for extending a rule for one group of people onto the entire of womankind. Okay. Now, let's move on. Now, notice that if you said it is only for the, but notice it says, know that you should ever marry his wives after him. So again, we know only the Prophet's wives. Normally, any widow can be married, but not the Prophet's wives. So there are certain things that are special for them only, okay? So you need a strong evidence to move the hukum. Could God have addressed Muslim women like He did Bani Israel? Yes. And so there is no statement from any of the Prophet's wives that they themselves said that this rule was applied to everybody. And no statement from any female Sahaba that said that this verse applied to them as well. So the strong evidence here is that this verse was applicable to the Prophet's wives. Okay, let's look at evidence 2. Now we go to hadith. That was all that the Quran said on this matter. So for some people who make this issue into a very big issue, that's all the Quran mentions on this. So let's go to the hadith. Narrated Aisha radiallahu anha, who said, the riders would pass us while we were with the Messenger of Allah. When they got close to us, we would draw our outer cloaks from our heads over our faces. When they passed by, we would uncover our faces. Now, two things here. The first is, Aisha radiallahu anha is narrating this. And who is us? The wives of the Prophet. Well, we've already established that the wives of the Prophets are special. So really, even if this hadith was authentic, and it is not authentic, it has 3 particular weaknesses, but even if it was authentic, yeah, they were ordered to cover themselves, cover their faces. So this has no bearing on mixed gatherings. So it's really evidence 2, evidence 1 does not apply, evidence 2 cannot apply because it's specific again to the Prophet's wives. In fact, Aisha herself, radiallahu anha, narrates about the Prophet ﷺ saying, a woman must neither wear a veil to cover her face, nor wear clothes that are dyed with saffron or other fragrant dyeing material. So this is Bukhari hadith. And you know that in the place which is the most mixed gathering in Sharia, if you like, is the Hajj and the Umrah. And in that place of all the other places where men and women are together in one place, the injunction is that women must not cover their faces. That's fascinating, that as an evidence to counter the second one that they said, but as a general evidence that in the holiest of the holies, you cannot cover your face. Okay, so it's very important. Some have used the hadith which says a veil should not touch a woman's face. Some people have got around it. By some scholars have said if you have a rod and the cloth flutters away from it, then it's not literally touching your face. You can do that, and so on and so on. But everybody accepts that that the veil must not touch the woman's face, i.e., she should not wear a face veil. Okay, let's go to evidence 3. Now, evidence 3 is a very big principle. Muslim women, surely you want to be like the Prophet's wives, don't you? Doesn't everybody, all Muslim women, want to be like Aisha radiallahu anha, like Khadija radiallahu anha, like Salama? Surely you want to be like them. They stayed in their homes. And if you want to be like them, you should also stay in your home. So this is the emulation argument. Now, it's a very powerful and emotive argument, but it requires analysis and scrutiny. Because the emulation argument, of course, is not just for the Prophet's wives. People say, we should follow the Sahaba. We emulate the Sahaba. Whatever they did, we do. Whatever the Prophet ﷺ himself, the highest of emulation is what the Prophet ﷺ did. But there are caveats around emulation argument. What do you emulate? How do you choose? Can a new rule that wasn't in the Quran or Hadith just be established through just emulation, copying them? Now, and notice the answer to that is, of course, no. No usul al-fiqh of any madhab has allowed a new hukum, new rule, to be established by copying only. Right, yeah, I'd like to be like the Prophet's wives. I know, from now on, please refer to me as mother of the believers. Everybody would say that's nonsense. That is a title applicable only to them. I want double reward for my actions. No, that is only for them. Double sin, only for them. No marriage after their husband passed away, after the Prophet passed away, only for them. So you can't say you want to be jealous because some of them were jealous. So what do you emulate? You don't emulate the drinking of the Sahaba, for example, who got drunk, or so you emulate the good. And if you say the emulation of the Prophet ﷺ, he is the uswatun hasana, the best example for you. What do you copy? What do you emulate? Do you emulate the marrying of 10 wives plus? No. Making it obligatory to pray tahajjud as he had for himself? Fasting longer than a day? No, all of these are for him. Of course you don't emulate those, because they're specifically, the Sharia and the Hadith, the Sunnah have established that these are specifically for him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, only. So what do you emulate then? Do you emulate sleeping on the floor on a mat? He didn't have a bed. Do you emulate not eating onions? I had somebody I know who mentioned to me that that brother, you know about miswak. He said that you use your toothbrush and toothpaste, and you're not using the sunnah, which was the miswak. So I said, look, you're taking miswak as a stick, as a holy stick, and the Prophet used miswak to clean his teeth. You could look at it slightly differently. You could say the Prophet used the best teeth cleaning equipment of his time. So I'll use the best teeth cleaning equipment of my time, which is a toothbrush. So emulation can be wider than just a specific literal thing. Prophet didn't like onions, so shall I not eat onions? Etc., etc., right? So what does one emulate? And I'll whiz through this. Wearing sandals, wearing a jubba, turban, hat, sword. What does emulate? And the answer to that is you emulate what the Prophet ﷺ wanted us to emulate, what he told us and directed us to copy. Not what Sharia made haram for us, not what is for him to do alone. Had the Prophet ﷺ wanted us to copy something, he would have said so. It's very simple. So therefore, applying this, if he did not mention anything, then no, you don't have to copy at all. So not, we mentioned that. So what does one emulate about the Sahaba, e.g. the Prophet's wives? You emulate their zeal, commitment in following the Sharia, their piety and their taqwa and closeness, in attaining closeness to Allah, their virtue, their courage, their steadfastness in adversity, their firmness, kindness, compassion, all the virtues. Why? Because they are the best generation. And that's in the hadith. So you emulate the virtues that Allah and His Prophet have already established. You emulate the good things in people, not anything else. That's up to you how you want to copy, but you can't make it a Sharia requirement. So had the Prophet ﷺ wanted women to emulate something from his wives, he would have said so. He did not. Therefore, it's not a must, neither is it a recommendation. If you want to, of course, you can. It's not a haram, but you can't make it a sunnah, and neither can you make it a fard. Okay? If you say, no, you must copy them, then I'm going to ask you, how come the female Sahaba did not copy the wives of the Prophet themselves? They did not stay in their homes. Very important. Okay, that's the emulation argument. The next argument comes through this hadith. And they say, look, the Prophet said, O Messenger of Allah, I love to pray with you. The Prophet said, I am aware of that, but your prayer in your residence, in your home, is better for you than the prayer in your people's mosque. And your prayer in your people's mosque is better than the prayer in a larger congregational mosque. So many times this hadith is quoted, and its variations. The prayer for a woman in the locked closet is better than the prayer in a veranda, is better than the prayer, and so on. Now, I'm going to tell you something which I found it surprising that so many people quoted this, but actually this hadith is very, very weak, okay? The best mosques for women are the inner parts of their houses and so on. And now, here we come to a hadith which scholars have said, some scholars have said there's a bit of weakness in them, others have said, no, they're okay. Some said the first bit is authentic, but not the second, okay? So, we know this is authentic, the first bit, do not prevent women from the mosque. And generally speaking, you have to understand how muhaddiths act. All hadiths are considered weak unless you have the sanad that makes it acceptable. Okay, so that's a general default position. Now, if the advice is that it is better to pray in a locked closet in home, if we say it's authentic and it's not authentic, then it's very interesting that none of the wives of the Prophet, so many of them went to the mosque and still attended way after the Prophet passing away. Okay, so it's very interesting that the women themselves did not act upon this. And of course, we have the famous Bukhari hadith, do not prevent the maidservants of Allah access to the mosques of Allah. And it's got a very long story where Umar's wife, for example, wanted to pray in the mosque, and Umar did not dare stop her because he knew that it was a statement of the Prophet. In fact, Abdullah ibn Umar said to his son, Bilal, that he would never talk to him again because he wanted to prevent his wife from coming to the mosque. Abdullah ibn Umar, said to his son, I'm narrating to you that which comes from the Messenger of Allah, and you have the audacity to say, by God, we shall certainly prevent them. So again, this evidence is not there. If it's true women could not come to the mosque, then how can we have this? The best rows for men are the first rows and the worst ones are the last ones, etc. This hadith suggests that women were in the mosque. So many hadiths suggest that. The Prophet performed the tawaf while riding from behind the people. So they were there in the tawaf. So notice Hajj, Umrah, and now we come to something not a lot of people know, and it always surprises many Muslims. I used to teach A-level Islamic studies, and many Muslims would be quite surprised by this. Every single prayer in the Prophet's mosque was in a mixed gathering. Men and women in the mosque with no partition. Of all the mosques that the Prophet ﷺ built, had built, encouraged to build, asked his Sahabas to build, not one single one had a partition separating men and women. Very important that, for us to realize, actually, even the prayers were mixed. It was one room, one hall, one area, men and women there. Okay, now let's go to the next evidence 5 that they use. And this is this hadith, this hadith. Now, this is a very famous hadith, but it is very weak. But it's quoted so much. And in fact, I would say that this hadith is probably one of the most often quoted hadith by those who believe it is obligatory for women against free mixing. But it is very, very weak. Salama narrates that Maymuna and I were in the presence of the Prophet when Abdullah ibn Maktoum arrived. As he was blind, it never occurred to us that it was necessary to observe hijab. Therefore, we remained seated. The Prophet ordered us to observe hijab. Here he means ordered us to move away to a different place. Remember, speak to them behind a curtain. I replied, Ya Rasulullah, he is blind, he cannot see us. Upon hearing this, the Prophet said, are you also blind and unable to see him? Now, you know, you don't have to think much about this. You say if the Prophet's wives were supposed to wear niqab whenever they had to go out, they had to see. So it just makes makes no sense that this hadith would be authentic, because it makes no sense. But it is a very, very weak hadith. Notice the authentic hadith regarding another matter to do with the great Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the blind Sahaba. May Allah bless him. Here it is in Sahih Muslim. Fatwa bin Qais reported, my husband Abu Umar ibn Hafs ibn al-Mughira sent Ayyash to me with a divorce. I dressed myself and came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, how many divorces have been made to you? He said, 3. He said, now notice, spend your iddah in the house of your cousin, Abdullah ibn Maktoum. He is blind, and you can put off your garment in his presence. So this is the direct contradiction of the other hadith, which is very weak. Okay, so evidence 5 goes, it does not stand. Evidence 6. Again, this is very quoted, and this is very, very, very weak. So this is one of the weakest hadiths of the ones that I've mentioned so far. Ali narrates that they were in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ when he asked, tell me what is most worthy act of a woman. Upon hearing, the companions remained silent. Ali reports, when I returned to my house, I asked the same question to Fatima, radiallahu anha, and she replied, a woman should not see a man, nor should a man see her. Very famous. I then related to this to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Fatima is my beloved child. For this reason, she has understood properly. This hadith is not weak, cannot be used as an evidence. Okay, good. Next. Actually, you don't need this. This one. The Prophet ﷺ came back from a battle, and a woman gave him something, and she came out. Where is it? They asked her, so this is right down, she was in that state of shock and grief when somebody asked her, oh lady, you left your home amid concern and disquiet, yet you remember to cover yourself. So she was either she was completely niqabbed or in a khawda. Even in that state, you did not fail to put on your veil. She gave a simple answer, my son has died. my shame, haya, has not. It has nothing to do with free mixing. Okay, nothing at all. In fact, where is she? She's out among people. I've not left after me a fitna more harmful than women for men. Doesn't mention anything to do with free mixing or mixed gatherings, etc. In fact, the Prophet himself said about girls going out to Eid, and the Prophet himself said that every woman should go to Eid prayer, even if she does not have an outer covering. She should borrow an outer covering and then still go to the Eid prayer. Many women don't realize that, actually. Okay, I think you get the general gist. Evidence at number 11, and now we come to the end of the thing. And now this is the only bit which I can say, well, okay, fair enough. This is the bit where it's called ad-daraiyyah. It means blocking the path to a greater wrong. And it comes from the Quranic ayah, do not go anywhere near zina. Don't approach zina. So don't even start on that journey. Now, blocking the path, i.e., in my opinion, to do this, although this is allowed, to do this may lead to a greater wrong. Therefore, this should not be allowed. That's what ad-daraiyyah is, blocking the path. It is, of course, purely subjective. One scholar will say, yeah, that does lead to that, and so we shouldn't be allowed. Another one will say, no, it's not. So ad-daraiyyah is not a textual evidence. Ad-daraiyyah is not Quran, Hadith, ijma, qiyas. This is way down in usul al-fiqh. But fair enough, it has a kind of flavor, but not haram halal. Okay, so let's go to this. A kind of ad-daraiyyah is the famous hadith in Bukhari. Abdullah ibn Abbas, I did not see anything so resembling minor sins as what Abu Hurairah said. We mentioned this because this is like ad-daraiyyah, the adultery of the eye, looking at something which is sinful. Why are these wrong? Of course, they're wrong in themselves, but also because they lead to zina. As the Prophet said, the private parts turn that into a reality, i.e. affirm them or deny them. Say to the believing men to lower their gaze. Why? Because it is blocking the path. Okay? Say to the believing women to lower their gaze. Again, why blocking the path? So that's the idea behind it. And of course, when Al-Fadl ibn Abbas rode behind the Prophet ﷺ, and they were near the Kaaba, and a woman from the tribe of Khata'am came, and she asked the Prophet ﷺ, but she was beautiful. Al-Fadl started looking at her as her beauty attracted him. And the Prophet ﷺ looked behind, so he was looking at her, and he moved Al-Fadl's face away. So again, showing that the Prophet ﷺ is saying, so the Prophet ﷺ himself carried on talking to her. So it wasn't the Prophet ﷺ look that was bad. It wasn't a look that was bad. It was Fadl himself, who was probably, almost, tantamount to gawping at her. And so the Prophet ﷺ saw that and moved his face. So the dirayah. The Prophet ﷺ didn't, by the way. They were in the Kaaba. The Prophet ﷺ didn't then say, right, all Umrah and Hajj must be segregated. No. Okay. And of course, we have Aisha, again, not wanting to come close to the people, the muhrim, male muhrim, in case there was touching, etc. Okay, that's all there is about mixed gatherings. And as you've seen, there are weaknesses. There are very weak hadiths. There are ayahs which doesn't apply. And so in the end, the conclusion has to be, and the majority of imams are slowly more and more. So for example, the Azhar's opinion now is mixed gatherings are allowed, etc. So gradually, I think people are moving away from what's been there for centuries. And here now, I'm going to give you evidence for mixed gathering, but I don't need to, of course, because once you've established there's nothing against something, it's allowed. But just to show you, the Prophet ﷺ said, if we say Eid, and Eid Salah for the majority of the madhabs is a sunnah muakkada. And for the Hanafis, it's a wajib. So it's not a fard. If it was fard for a woman to stay in her home, then how come the Prophet ﷺ said, tell the women to come out for Eid prayer? It makes no sense. The Prophet ﷺ collected money, etc., and then give sadaqah, and he and Bilal went over to the women's area, and they crossing the roads till he reached the women's area. And then the Bilal spread out his garment and they gave sadaqah. They went over to the women's area, mixing taking place. Imam Malik, Anas bin Malik, that Sulaim, and other women, Aisha radiallahu anha, used to accompany the men when they went to war and give water. And I said this to a mufti, to the mufti I had a debate with. I said, look, is it fard for a woman to go to battle? He said, no. I said, yet you believe it's fard for a woman to stay in her home? Yes. I said, so it's sinful for her to go out? Yes. I said, then how come these female Sahaba went out to the battlefield to feed, to give men water and look after and tend? And some fought, of course. Hind fought. And how come they allowed them to do a sunnah at the expense of a sin? So he said to me, I mean, I can't accept his argument. He said, maybe the battlefields were segregated. Maybe these female companions went out and fought against female mushriks, which of course is not true. So that's that. Now it's a very famous hadith, the wife of Zubair. One day, this is narrated by Asma, the sister of Aisha. One day I was on my way home with a load on my head when I met the Prophet with a number of Ansar men. The Prophet asked for me to ride behind him on the camel, but I felt shy of joining the company event. So the Prophet himself said, why don't you come and join us? Well, I'll give you a lift, in other words. So again, showing that there was no problem with that. Sahal ibn Sa'd says that on the wedding day of the Prophet of Abu Sayyid al-Sa'idi, his wife was the one who was serving the men that day while she was yet a bride. Ibn Hajar, because of this, says, Ibn Hajar did the commentary of Bukhari, it is permissible for a wife to serve her husband and those he invites over to his home. Of course, this famous hadith where the Prophet said to a man in the mosque, who can feed this hungry man? And one Sahaba said, I will. He took him home. And of course, they put the kids to bed and then they dimmed the lights and both husband and wife pretended to be eating. In other words, husband and wife were there and a strange man who was their guest. So again, permitted to be in that same gathering. Salman, of course, the famous hadith, went to visit Abu Darda, found his wife looking upset and had a long conversation, which we've got in hadith. Aisha went to visit Bilal when he was with fever. The Prophet ⁇ used to sleep in the house of Haram, who was not a relative. And remember the famous hadith where he woke up smiling and Haram said, why are you smiling? And he said, I dreamt the ships had taken my message. And she said, Ya Rasulullah, please pray that I will be on the ships, etc. The Prophet in the house of Sulaim when he was sleeping, and she collected sweat from him. So all of these point to that. So in conclusion, every word in the Quran is divine. Every word is specially chosen. Allah did not say, oh, believing women, stay put in your harem. He didn't say that. He said, wives of the Prophet, okay? Women were allowed in the mosques. Absolutely, you cannot forbid women from coming to mosque. Injunction is absolutely clear that we have for salah, for zakah, for saum, etc. And yet for mixing, there is no clear injunction that we found. Battles were mixed. The Prophet and the female companions, male companions, asked questions that were mixed. Eid was mixed. The servants were mixed. Even itikaf in the mosque was mixed. The shopping and bazaars were mixed. The mosques were mixed. Hajj and Umrah was mixed. The meals were often mixed. Bayt al-Aqaba, of course, when the women came to give the Pledge of Allegiance, was mixed. So, you know, so this is the scenario that you had at that time. Of course, in the end, of course, Allah knows best, knows us best. He's created laws to give us a balance. And it's sad that often we see quite centuries of male chauvinism sometimes creeping in, and people say women should be inside, not able to speak out, not able to do itikaf, mosques became male domains, fatwas decided by men, no outside work, etc. So some even said, unbelievably, that even her voice is awrah. So we've got to be very careful, especially when it comes to injunctions regarding women. And we have to go back to Quran and Sunnah. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I know I've crammed a lot in, and I'm sure you have lots and lots of questions. Forgive me for the speed of things, and I hope and pray that Allah grants us the best from this in order to elucidate aspects of His Sharia. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much for that, Uncle Ahtsham. That was honestly incredible. I mean, I've learned so much already, and you're absolutely right. There are a lot of questions, and I wanted to direct them to you straight away so that we can get through them as much as we can. So I've grouped some of them as well, because inevitably we got some questions which are related. So here's the first one. I have held an Islamic event recently, and our Imam studied from Leicester Darul Uloom. In his view, me sitting with my wife and him sitting with his wife on the same table is not permissible. How do we change this thinking if this is wrong? And similar to that, how do we educate our Imams on views of women and segregation as they are being oppressed by men and misguiding women using religion?
Okay, now let's take that scenario for a moment. You have an Imam and his wife, and you have yourself and your wife in a dinner setting. Now, I go around quite often, and my job is actually meeting Imams and so on. And I can say to you that, sorry, just 1 minute. And I can say to you that you have to respect the view of the other. So for example, if an Imam was to come to my house with his wife, I would say to them that, look, and I'm in my right to say this is how we have it at home, and if you want to do that, then we'll do it. But I want them to feel comfortable. They're my guests. So I will say to them that, look, this is what we normally do. We normally have no problem in men, women eating together of my household or guests. Many guests have come and their wives, and we've eaten together on the table. But if that makes you uncomfortable, by all means, we'll try and arrange something different, and we'll have a separate sitting for the women. And that's how we were brought up as well, of course, in our culture. We used to have somebody said to one of the estate agents that you Muslims always require 2 reception rooms, one for your family and one for guests. But that's generally how we were brought up. I have no problem if that's how he wants to do it. My problem comes when he says this is haram to do. Now, haram is a big word. And so I would ask him, please, and I don't find that oppressive if that's what the view he wants to follow. My question is, what statement of the Prophet ﷺ, what Quranic verse made that a haram thing to do? Where is the evidence that makes this setting, husband-wife eating a meal with another husband-wife? Where is it that makes this haram? The authentic hadith of the guest that was invited across to the house, and they put their kids to bed and they dimmed the lights and so on, and they ate there, demonstrates that that was one acceptable norm. So, you know, that goes against what they've said. The guests at her own wedding, the bride serving the male guests, shows you that that was not the practice at that time. That doesn't mean that it's haram. So I have no problem if that's what makes you comfortable, but please understand, to use the word haram and sin is a big thing. Instead say, in my opinion, this would lead to greater wrong. I don't think we should be mixing like that. I have no problem with that's your thought, that's your caution that you want to do, that's your ad-daraiyyah, blocking of the means, no problem with that. But don't make it a sinful thing. You need evidence for sin. And the Quran and Sunnah here says that Sahaba did exactly what you were saying. It was a sin, na'udhu billah. And I'm sure you don't want to say that was a sin. Okay, so that's how I would go about it. I would gently make the statement that, please, brother, just refrain from the word sin. I have no problem with you wanting to do it like that. And my father's generation and many, that's how we grew up. When somebody comes and so on, for close family members and close family friends, we used to have a mixed sort of dinner. Otherwise, we'd have separation. No problem with that, but don't call it a sin. Okay, I hope that answers elements of that.
So another question. So 3 questions into one. Can a man and women be friends? What are the etiquettes of behavior in mixed gatherings? Can you chat with the opposite gender until 1 a.m.? Can you swap phone numbers? Can you arrange to meet outside of the event for coffee? Can you be just good friends with a non-mahram member of the opposite gender?
Right, so I've got, can you be friends with the men and women?
Yep.
What else?
What are the etiquettes of behavior in a mixed gathering? Can you chat with opposite gender until 1 a.m.? So that they were just listing out a few things. Can you swap phone numbers? Can you arrange to meet outside? Can you just be good friends with non-mahram?
Okay. Right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Right, so we established at the beginning what the 5 things that you cannot do when it comes to gender interaction that are clearly stated in the Quran and Hadith. Yeah, we mentioned zina, we mentioned not being on your own with a member of the opposite gender. We mentioned flirtation. We mentioned lustful look, etc. So we mentioned that the boundaries that the Sharia has placed upon us regarding gender interaction. Then we also mentioned that these are the boundaries. You can't cross these because it's a sin. So you can't, I mean, for example, but of course everything has an exception. You can't say, for example, if you say, so supposing I'm walking past a reservoir and I see a woman drowning, and I'm a good swimmer, and she's not swimming, she's drowning. I can't say, sorry, love, I can't touch you. Anyway, you dive in because it's a darura, it's a necessity, and you save and you do what you need to do. And sadly, there was a case in Saudi Arabia where firefighters refused to put the fire out in a girls' hostel because they felt that the girls were uncovered. And so many girls died because they didn't want to see the girls uncovered, and they refused to go in there. And so we have this absurdity. So of course, every rule has an exception, but these are the boundaries. These 5 things that I mentioned, they're the boundaries. Beyond that is up to you. You as a family, you as a person, you as a family, you as an organization, you have to decide where on this line of ad-daraiyyah, of caution, do you want to draw your line? So if you ask me, if somebody said to me, for example, I know that one sister and brother were considering each other for marriage, and she said to him, so they're still considering and they've decided that yes, they want to marry each other. And she said to him, I don't want any further communication, if that's all right, until my parents have said yes or no, because I don't want my heart to get too involved with you, and it might be broken if the parents say no. Now, it's not a haram halal issue, this. That's where she felt her boundary was, not haram halal, etiquette, her own personal etiquette. And this is where you draw your own personal line. You as a family decide a line. You as an organization decide a line. Now, can men and women be friends? That is not an Islamic question. That's a question for psychologists. By that, I mean, you're asking, can they be platonic friends? I.e., can a man and a woman be friends just like 2 women can be friends, or 2 men can be friends? I.e., can they be friends without any sexual feelings, thoughts, etc.? I take it that's what is being meant here. Well, that go ask the psychologists, because that's not this idea of, can you interact men and women? Yes. Can you talk to men and women? Yes. Islam Sharia says yes. Can you interact with men and women? Yes. Sharia says yes. Can you be in the same room as men and women, talking, listening, etc.? Yes. Sharia says yes. Right? So this idea about, can you be friends? What does friends involve? What does it mean, etc.? Then that's a matter for, as long as those boundaries are not crossed, then you can do whatever, however you want to, for your own personal boundaries and rules that you make for yourself. Regarding, can you share numbers? Well, where is it that you can't? Can I give my address? Well, where is it you can't? Can I meet someone of the opposite gender? Yeah, meet them. You meet them at work, you meet them at school, you meet them in the cafe, but just please be careful of those 5 boundaries. Then the rest, you decide your own particular, how much further you want to go and how much you don't want to go, because it's not obligatory. Those 5 are obligatory. Okay, it's very difficult because this is a subjective issue where you decide, actually, I think for my family or for my daughter, my son, myself, this is the boundary I'm going to give. You know, the lustful touch was not allowed. And so we had a very strange situation where I had an imam who had no problem with shaking hands with opposite gender. So he'd be shaking hands with a range of women, etc. No problems with it, because he felt that actually this wasn't lustful, this was urf, this was custom. So he would shake hands. But of course, what is not allowed is to touch someone with lust. And so he got into a very, very embarrassing situation. He was saying to me that this young manager arrived, and she was very beautiful, very attractive. And she came into the room with two others, and they were shaking hands with everybody, and he felt no, he couldn't shake her hand. And now, because he'd singled her out from everybody else, this caused him no end, and he had to try and explain to her afterwards, which didn't go very well, that the only reason he didn't shake her hand is because he found her attractive, which meant, of course, he did. But anyway, so you know, these are the boundaries. You can't do the 5 boundaries. Beyond that, you chop and you decide yourself how you want to play that particular thing, because this is not about haram, halal, it's about caution. Where do you want to place your caution? Different Sahaba had different degrees of caution that they would do. Aisha criticized the female Sahaba who went into the crowd to do her tawaf and kiss the stone. She criticized her. But of course, she was allowed to do that, but she criticized her. So she had her own different sense of what was her caution boundary. Okay.
Jazakallah, thank you for that. So we have a question here. It says, sorry, I'm looking to set up a Muslim Youth Center. How should I go about doing this with issues around segregation? We don't have many volunteers. I'd like to think boys and girls can share activities and work together. Or am I asking too much? If a sister has a hijab on, does that not give her freedom to interact with non-mahrams, i.e. work and study, etc.? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, no problem. Yeah, so we've addressed that actually to a large extent, that yes, from a Sharia perspective, there is a view that was mentioned by the other sister who asked the question, and it is a majority view that says that no, you cannot interact. There is no free mixing. But as I've explained, when you look at the evidences, the view that I particularly follow are of those scholars who say, no, it is acceptable and there is nothing against it. And that's what the whole presentation was about. So if you're asking me, the scholars that I follow, said that there is no problem in mixed activities between the genders, as long as these 5 rules are established. No awrah, awrah is not uncovered, etc., 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 touching and lustful looks and so on. As long as those 5 are respected, then there's no problem with mixed activities. Now, that doesn't mean it's obligatory for you to do those mixed activities. You have to decide, where is my youth club? How will the community judge this? What do I think about parents and etc., and how will they react to this? And you make your decision for your youth club, because just by the very fact that something is allowed to do does not mean that it is a must to do. That how you wish to do it in your youth club. If your question is it haram for me to arrange mixed activities? No, it is not. Is it allowed? Yes, it is. Okay. And what are the boundaries? These are 5 boundaries. Okay. Should I do this? Well, that is not up to me. I don't know where your youth club is. I don't know what your community is, who you're pitching at, what the reaction of the community will be, where you are. Are they very conservative? One sister asked me that she was going to go to work in Saudi Arabia, and she was going to go as a teacher in a Saudi school, not in an expat school. And what should she do? And I said to her, you have to wear niqab, because that is the environment you're going into. So there, not wearing niqab is seen as disrespectful. So you have to go by the environment you're in and wisdom. This not a haram halal issue. It is a wisdom issue for you to make. Is it allowed for you? Is it? Yes, it is. Okay.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much for that. So I've got 2 questions on Hazrat Aisha. So I wanted to ask, Hazrat Aisha went to war and led the army, so she would have inevitably got out the house. Was staying home related to common chores? And then another question, what is the hadith by Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala about veils, and what is the context for it?
Yeah, so the first one, the last bit of the first, she said she led the war, and then?
So why was she told to stay home? Was it related to chores in the house, or?
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the injunction of the wives of the Prophet to stay at home was not, of course, just directed at Aisha. It was directed to all the Prophet's wives, and it was during the lifetime of the Prophet. So it was a general injunction. Why were they asked to stay at home? A big question. And nothing absolutely clear. But we get an indication from the statement of Umar and a few others that the Prophet's house started becoming like a community center. People were coming in and out, delegations arriving, etc. So as a kind of precaution, as a special thing for the wives of the Prophet, this was the injunction. So that's the reason. It wasn't just Aisha radhiyallahu anha. It was to all the Prophet's wives. And it did not apply, as I have shown, and that's the belief I follow, even though the tafsir writers may say otherwise. I cannot see and find any evidence, and that's not me, sorry, I shouldn't be saying I cannot see. I follow the scholars who have not found a single shred of evidence to move that to all women. Secondly, now, Aisha radhiyallahu anha led the army in the Battle of the Camel because she felt she had to leave her home for what she regarded from her viewpoint as an injustice that was going on, and she had to correct it. So she led that army, and so she left her home for that purpose. Now, of course, she left her home after that anyway for going to Umrah and Hajj and so on, because these are necessities, if you like, duties. So the general rule was stay in your home except for need. And she felt it was a need at that time to lead this army. She, of course, was wrong. And history and later on proved she was wrong, and she regretted that. Not regretted leaving her home, but regretted leading the army against Ali radhiyallahu anhu. Okay, and the second question, I cannot remember, forgive me. Osama, do you have the second question?
Yeah, no worries, sorry. So the second question was, what is the hadith by Aisha radhiyallahu ta'ala about veils, and what is the context for it?
Right, so Aisha radhiyallahu anha is, the hadith is weak, but let's say it's authentic. The one that she said that when she was in her ihram and she's going towards the Kaaba, the Haram, and she said whenever any men would come by, we would cover our faces with our veils, and then with our shawls, and then let go of them when they left. Now that bit, the covering of the shawl, I think is authentic, but not the veil itself. So that's the context. So she would take the shawl and she would put it over her face. Why? Because already the Prophet ﷺ had established in the Quran, so this is after the Prophet ﷺ, it had been established in the Quran that they speak to men from behind a veil. Now, regarding her hadith for ordinary women, Aisha radhiyallahu anha narrates from the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet ﷺ said to women, do not cover your face. Do not let the veil touch your face when you are coming as a muhrim, when you are putting your ihram on. So it's accepted in all 4 madhabs, generally speaking, and you'll find this in all the 4 madhabs, that a woman should not wear niqab if she is going for Hajj and Umrah. Now, some scholars said, no, the actual hadith says it should not touch your face, so they have a baseball cap and they have the niqab there, so it's not touching your face, it's a bit of a distance. Other scholars argue that that is doing hila. You are negating the spirit of the hadith of the Prophet which said don't have the veil. What I'm saying to you is it's authentic from the Prophet that in the holiest of the holies, at a time when the greatest gathering of Muslims is taking place globally, Hajj and Umrah, a woman should not cover her face. That is amazing. That is interesting, that in itself. That tells you that and it's a separate argument about hijab and veil, but it gives you, sheds you an insight into that issue. Okay. I'm sure each question is throwing up 10 different questions, but that's the nature of these things.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So this question says, every situation must be taken into perspective and accountability must also be taken. Concerning pre-mixing, my understanding would be so long as intermingling isn't happening, i.e. non-mahrams talking and sitting next to each other, isn't important or of concern, then it shouldn't be allowed, as this is what leads to greater problems. I agree with most of what Uncle Ahtsham has said, but please don't make it a means to promote or allow free mixing as a norm, as this may cause a greater fitna. Jazakallah khair. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, so I mean, I'm glad you've put it the way you've put it, okay? So I think you put it quite well. You've said, I believe it will lead to greater fitna. Okay, brilliant. That's your belief. What you haven't said, which is very good of you, you haven't said, I believe Islam does not allow, or it is a sin for us to. If you believe that, for example, if I said, children and everybody, drinking too much sugary drinks is bad for you, don't do it. Now you can say, well, I've got the weight of evidence. I think it is bad for you. Others might say, no, it's good for you, etc. Fluoride in water, I think is harmful, and so on. So this is your belief that having non-mahram men and women in the same setting, chatting, etc., will lead to greater fitna. Okay, that's fair enough. That's your belief. But you haven't, and you carefully worded it very well. You haven't said, no, this is haram to do so. And that's my presentation was just about that. How you pitch yourself, where you think harm is and isn't, is your business, not mine. But don't use the word sin, heaven, hell, etc. on this issue. It is interesting. I met a big Saudi scholar back in 91, 92. And I asked him, Sheikh, can I ask why it is that the Supreme Fatwa Council in Saudi Arabia have stated that it is haram, i.e. a sin, for a woman to drive a car in Saudi Arabia? So his answer, and listen to his answer, and you'll understand what he's trying to say. So please be dispassionate. Don't get emotive on this. I mean, you might think, oh, it's ridiculous. No. Listen calmly and carefully to what he said. He said, in America and places in the West, adultery is very, very common. And affairs are happening outside marriage, left, right, and center. What we find is that in all of these countries where adultery is very high, women are able to drive. Therefore, in the opinion of the Permanent Committee for Fatwa, restricting the movement of women will have a knock-on effect on reducing adultery. In other words, what he's actually saying is, in my opinion, in our opinion as a Fatwa Council, we believe that women going out results in a harm. So he's making the same argument, except he's maybe further to this side. He's saying, in his opinion, a woman driving will lead to greater fahisha, greater fitna, and therefore we've stopped women. So it's a ad-daraiyyah, this is his personal choice. Where I disagree with him is, I wish he'd said it like that. I wish he'd said, in our opinion, this is not used haram or halal, not use sin and hellfire. If he'd said, in our view, this is, okay, fair enough, that's your view, this is my view. Okay, so where you decide to place your particular bit of caution is absolutely up to you. And as an organization is the beauty of ISP and organizations like that is they have shura. where you sit down together and the people come forward with their views, and as a collective you make a decision that this is where we're going to do. And just like ISB made the decision way back in 1991 when I was there about that seating for men and women in the same room without a partition. So that's organization make that. You as a family member, as a head of your family, will make that decision about how interaction. You personally will make that decision regarding you. Okay, but just please, it's not a haram halal issue. Okay, well, whether something goes towards fitna or not, subjective view. Others will say no, it doesn't.
Jazakallah, thank you so much. Next question here is, was Asma invited to share the same camel as the Prophet, peace be upon him?
Yes, authentic. She was asked to sit behind him. And she declined because she was quite shy and she felt that Zubair would be quite overcome with jealousy if he found out. And also that he would be humiliated because he'd feel humiliated and embarrassed that his wife, you know, that there are all the other Sahaba. So she carefully and said declined to do so. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Salam, thank you very much for the clear 5 boundaries, AWRAH being one of them. I ask this completely openly and ignorantly. If we do host a mixed gathering in uni, is it sinful if there are women who don't wear hijabs?
Okay, very good question. Of course, that touches on the subject of hijab, etc. Right, so now the short answer, and this requires a detailed analysis of that topic. The short answer is quite a few scholars believe that seeing a woman without a head covering is not sinful. Others say it is, but quite a sizable number say it is not sinful, and that's the opinion that I follow. It's interesting that none of the servants, the slave girls, slave women of the time of the Prophet wore a khimar, a head covering, so they had their hair open. But I mean, I don't want to go into that the specifics about why, how, but the short answer is it's not an issue. I asked this because during my master's in theology, this was my question. I went round 16 different muftis to ask, can a Muslim man watch TV, watch the news at 10 with a female presenter who of course is not Muslim and doesn't wear hijab? And it was quite interesting. 6, 7 said, no, it's forbidden, it's a sin. And 10 said it was not a problem. Okay, so that I hope that answers your question.
Perfect, thank you so much. Just before we ask the last few questions, could I just do a quick reminder to everyone, just to tell them, if you've been enjoying talks like these, if you've been enjoying the masterclasses, the Ramadan packs, the Pearls of Wisdom, then please join us. It might be that you want to start a study circle. I know a lot of you in the comment section have talked about your frustrations about starting something and getting some backlash, but if you really want to, if you have any new ideas, if you think you can make our events better, and if you need any help, then please join us at isb.org.uk. And if you don't want to become a member, that's completely fine, but just keep in touch on our social medias, keep coming to these events. We love having you here, but yeah, I thought I'd quickly mention that just before we ask the last few questions. Okay, so this question here says, there is a hadith that says it's better that you be struck on your head with an iron needle than to touch a woman you are not allowed to. If possible, can you discuss whether this is regard to shaking hands / hugging?
So again, we're moving slightly away from the topic, but that's fine. I'll entertain that. It's slightly linked. The hadith you mentioned is weak. And it says, touch a woman. Now, for a moment, and the way I think it's best to understand that hadith is that it says it's better for a red hot poker or whatever to be struck on the head than to touch a woman. Now, if you use the word touch, lamps, touch, and you look at a very, very, very good understanding of the word touch and the difference between the Hanafi and the Shafi madhab on understanding the word touch. In the Quran, it mentions about, for example, when you are fasting, not to touch women. Yep, so the Shafis took the word touch to be literal. So they said that if you have wudu, for example, and you touch a woman, your wudu will break. The Hanafi said, no, the word touch here is the word, the word touch regarding wudu is the same word as the touch when you are fasting, do not touch a woman, i.e. do not have sex with a woman. So do not have sex, men and women, do not have sex during Ramadan because sex invalidates the fast. So the Hanafi said, no, the touch is a euphemism, is a metaphor for making love. And so they now look at the hadith, even though it is weak, the hadith about the iron rod, just for a moment, let's say it is authentic. Now it makes sense. Watch how I rephrase the hadith. Better that a red hot poker strikes you in the head than you have illegal sexual intercourse with a strange woman. Now it makes sense. So that's how you understand that. Some scholars did use it for shaking hands. It has no bearing on it. I mean, it's weak, number one. The most authentic thing about touching and shaking hands is the Prophet himself saying, I do not touch the hand of a woman. And from there, the quite a sizable number of scholars, including Sheikh Qardawi, for example, Sheikh Faisal Mawlawi, Sheikh Abdullah al-Judai, they say that the best you can take from the hadith, the Prophet was saying, I do not touch the hand, is that it's makruh, not haram. Because the Prophet could have used the word, or Muslim do not, or believers do not. The angels curse the one who does. Instead, he said, I do not. And so the best you can say is karaha, is disliked. Okay?
Perfect. Assalamu alaikum. With regards to AWRAH, please may I humbly ask about these teachings can be translated to social media and whether it is halal to show your face and voice as a woman. And then another comment that came up was ISB sisters are allowing promoting non-hijabis on posters. Surely you can say this is wrong.
Okay, right. So let's take the first one first. Sorry, it slipped my mind again. The issue about a voice being awrah.
So yeah, sorry. Just is it halal to show your face and voice as a woman on social media?
Yeah. So here. I mean, I don't want to go into the evidences about hijab, face, veil, etc. Because that's and it requires an in-depth look at it, and we've done it. I've done it and studied with Sheikh Abdullah. We spent 3.5-4 years on this topic. But in short, I will say to you that the majority of scholars, historically and classically, have said that there is nothing wrong with showing the face from a woman. They do not include it as part of the awrah, the majority. And a sizable number do not regard the voice as being awrah. In actual fact, when you look at the evidence, the voice being awrah is much, much lower in terms of evidence. The evidence is a voice is not awrah of a woman. And the Quranic verse that they use is the same verse that I've just mentioned, and do not be complacent in speech. It means do not be seductive in speech, men and women. Do not be seducing each other by speech. Utter speech which is urfi, which is normative speaking, and so there's no problem with that. I remember when we did a program in university, and I was on the campus committee, ISOC committee, and we had this sister to come and speak, and one of the brothers said, could you please ask her to utter, when she does a speech, to start uttering guttural sounds, really deep, hello, how, because otherwise her voice is too seductive. And I remember Sheikh Saeed and a few of the sitting there being quite taken aback by this Libyan brother. And Sheikh Saeed said, do you find it seductive? And he said, yes. He said, then you should not come to the talk. So the voice being awrah, no, it is a weak opinion, but it is found by some scholars, and face is the majority, is no problem. Regarding can you use non-hijabbed faces to promote materials, etc., Really, I would say that's a matter for you as an organization to decide whether you want to do that or not. Can someone see a non-hijabbed a woman without the khimar, without the head covering? Yes, they can. Is it sinful to do so? No, it's not. Is it sinful for the woman to do so? Now, here is a matter of opinion where you draw the line. The vast majority of scholars say a woman without a khimar is a sin. It is a sin because the vast majority regard it as an obligation. There is a small number of people who say no, it is not. It requires a deep study and going through it if you wanted to go through that. But can you have it on posters? Yes, you can. It's an organizational issue whether you want to discuss whether you should be promoting something which the majority frown upon or not. So that's a matter of you as an organization.
Jazakallah, thank you so much. And one final last question. So it was just on the Prophet ﷺ shaking women's hands. The individual said, I thought he put his hand in a bowl of water and then asked the women to do the same after he removed his hand.
Yes, I did not say that the Prophet ﷺ shook hands with a woman. I said to you that the Prophet ﷺ said, I do not shake hands with a woman. And yes, so he had a few methods of how to take, for example, the Pledge of Allegiance. He would hold a cloth and they would hold a cloth. And another one, he wrapped cloth around and they would do so. Having said that, of course, you counterbalance that with a female Sahaba saying that we used to ask the Prophet anything and he would always be willing to listen to us. And many of us would take him by the hand and ask him something. Now, you can take that metaphorically or physically, however, but he himself said, I do not take the hand of women. But he used other means. But of course, I gave you the famous hadith of Sulaim and Haram, where Sulaim saying that she took the sweat from his head. She's not related to him. And it's not authentic, it's not a correct interpretation that she took knits from his hair, but better is that she combed his hair or parted his hair, rather than saying knits. So that's also there. So you balance this with that. So personally, I changed my view, my personal view. I think the normative now, probably the safest is to say it's makruh, dislike. But if some scholars have declared it mubah. Sheikh Hassan Turabi of Sudan said it's mubah, i.e. no problem. It depends on the urf of the situation. Of your town, of your country. In Sudan, women generally, Muslim women, shake hands with men. And there's a story of a scholar who studied in Saudi and went back to Sudan. And of course, he believes it's haram. He follows that opinion. And then he called up and he said, I have changed my view. Because in Sudan, it was a norm for men and women to shake hands. The only person you don't shake hands with is a person of dodgy, disreputable person. And he said that his village had gathered to welcome him back and his aunties and cousins were all there. And one female auntie came forward and a cousin came forward, put her hand out to shake, and he moved his hand away and she went away crying. And he realized that he'd caused her distress because he hadn't taken into account the urf, the tradition of his time. So this is disliked according to majority. If you do it, no problem. Some say it is mubah and allowed. Okay.
Jazakallah, thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We've definitely got so many more questions. But thank you so much for that, Uncle Ahtsham. I mean, I've taken so much from it. After you talked about the 5 boundaries, talking about the 11 evidences, talking about the emulation, to what extent we should be emulating anyone, talking about the fact that that the Quranic verses that are directed to the Prophet's wives and not to women generally. I mean, I thought, and then the question and answers, I thought it was genuinely amazing. So thank you so much for that. So guys, that's all for today. I think just to reiterate, isp.org.uk to become a member, to find out all our upcoming events. Please join our WhatsApp group, which you can find in the chat. And thank you so much for joining. So we should probably end it there. I'll end on Surah Al-Asr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.